Hi, I'm Jim Guy. I'm a clinical psychologist at the Headington Institute in Pasadena. I'm happy to be here with you today. Thanks for being here. I want to talk to you about a pretty serious topic, and that's the topic of moral injury in healthcare work. Over the past 20 years in working with global aid workers and emergency responders, healthcare workers, and other community caregivers, I've become aware of the experience of moral injury that I really believe is different from burnout or stress or compassion fatigue. And if we don't highlight that difference, you may find yourself experiencing it and not knowing where to turn with it. So let's talk today about moral injury, how it happens, how you experience it, and what you can do to overcome it and get back to the full vitality that you want. In the healthcare professions, in the work that you're required to do, there are three ways that your spirit, your sense of call and vitality and purpose can be undermined while you're doing your work. That's going to be kind of a rough way for us to define moral injury. It's going to be injury to your heart, to your soul, to that part of you that gives you a reason and meaning for doing this work. The first way that that can get injured is by the things you see in your work each day. You see human beings suffer, you see them die, you see sometimes some things that seem so unfair or even cruel, if not just random. And it violates sometimes your sense of how things should be. People get hurt and injured and ill who don't deserve it. And there's something about seeing that on a daily basis that injures our heart a little bit, because we start to wonder about sort of the moral scales of the universe and how all this happens. That can cause a little bit of wound and damage to our heart. Worse than that are the things that you have to do sometimes. Things that are inconsistent with your own value system, your own sense of right and wrong and priorities. And that can be for a number of reasons that your hand is sort of forced. Sometimes it's because limited resources. We've certainly seen that during COVID. Some folks get better care than others. Some recover, some would have if they had had the resources available. Sometimes you have to make choices on who gets care of what type. Sometimes you got to even make choices that may impact whether a person lives or not. Those are tough decisions that the human brain is not wired to do very comfortably. And as a result of the things you're forced to do, by the very nature of your work, sometimes it wounds your spirit. It hurts you to have to do those things. Worse than that are times when the bureaucracy and the requirements of the healthcare industry force you to do some things that just don't feel right to you. The pressure to generate income, the pressure to comply by all the bureaucratic regulations, and to demonstrate your value to the healthcare system that seem completely separate from the reasons why you went into healthcare to begin with, and don't have any direct connection to the welfare of your patient who's right in front of you, who's trusting you and relying on you. That can cause some harm to your soul and some moral injury. Third, there's some things you know that you wish you didn't know sometimes in the patient care that wounds your spirit. In the healthcare industry, we don't have all the answers. Even when we think we're right, sometimes we're not. Sometimes it's necessary to give patients hope when there's very little hope. And oftentimes, there's an element of chaos or randomness that's just beyond control. That can wound your spirit too. because you feel like this is not how it should be. When someone's in this vulnerable position, we ought to have the answers. We ought to have the treatments. We ought to have the resources. They ought to get my full attention. I shouldn't be worrying about productivity as much as, metrics are not as important as mission. And mission is the welfare of your patients. Now, it's never either or, but there are times where you do feel like you're backed into a corner where the priorities that you have to respect aren't the ones that you personally have yourself. That is it's going to wound your soul. And when you do this stuff long enough, over the months and years, you begin to feel the cumulative effects of this because of the things that you see, the things you do, and the things you know that just don't seem right. That's different than burnout. It's different than traumatic stress. And unless we pay attention to it, it erodes the very thing that brought you into this field to begin with. And that's that deep, heartfelt desire of compassion, of love for others, of wanting to be of service to the community. That's what motivates you to get up in the morning. That's what used to motivate you to get up in the morning. And if this gets undermined, it's really difficult to have joy in your work and to be at your best and to give the best patient care you want to give. And if it goes long enough, you can see that it just starts to undermine your resilience, which then undermines your performance, which then undermines the outcomes that you're aiming at. So now let's think about what moral injury does to you and how you experience it. I've mentioned one already. You can get pretty discouraged. And that discouragement can lead to unhappiness, it can lead to grief or sadness, it can lead to depression, because there's no way out. It doesn't feel like anything you do is going to change the way the system has backed you into a position to not be able to give the care you want to give. Some of you are just going to get angry, and you're going to get frustrated, and you may even act out a little bit on that, because you're not as prone to internalize it, but you will externalize it. And so some folks that struggle with that just get really hard to work with. So that you're kind of, those of you that tend in that direction, may experience less connection to your colleagues because of that level of frustration that you're experiencing. And then for some of you, you just get numb. That's what I've seen most often in healthcare workers that I've worked with. They just get numb. They have to get numb to get through the day, to do the work they do. If they get angry or they get depressed, they feel immobilized by depression, and they feel like things don't go too well if they act out on their anger. So they numb themselves to that sense of violation and that sense of compromise that their heart is struggling with. Obviously, there's ways to do that on the inside, there's ways to do that on the outside. Those are short-term strategies, alcohol use, sleep medications, recreational drugs, any kind of reckless behavior that's a distraction is a way of numbing yourself to the pain of that moral injury. Those are not good long-term solutions. So let's talk a little bit now of what are some things that you can do that will help if you begin to realize that you're experiencing moral injury, and many of you may be, particularly as a result of this past year. The first thing I'd suggest is you need to get some support. Moral injury is not something you can battle on your own. The lone wolf sort of, I can take care of this on my own approach for moral injury in particular, we found isn't that effective. You really are going to have to reach out and connect to others to get some help with this. Maybe loved ones, maybe friends, maybe a skilled counselor, maybe a religious leader, but you've got to find somebody who understands what this is like for you. They're not disturbed by it, and they're not going to blame you for it. And they'll talk with you and kind of walk alongside of you as you find your way out. And you're going to have to find your own way out because it's different for everybody. But what we have found is, as a group, folks seem to need support at times like this. So I'd encourage you then to reach out to others and talk about this. You may have to educate them a little bit because this isn't talked about that much in most circles, certainly not in the healthcare circles that I've been in. So let me encourage you to reach out and help people understand that experience a little bit better that you're going through. Secondly, I think there's a need for a different perspective, and we've worked pretty hard on this with our global aid workers and emergency responders in particular. It seems like those that are able to think about what's happening in a given moment as being part of a bigger picture seem to do a little bit better. They don't get injured in their heart and soul quite as much. It's not being numb. It's a kind of realism that says there's successes and failures. There's good and bad. And I've got to be able to integrate them all together into my worldview. I need a worldview or a perspective that recognizes that sometimes things don't go the way they should. And yet not feel despair over that, but determination to make sure I do my best that I can in that situation without having to have the solution completely myself. There's so few moments when we feel like we have everything we need to give everything that's needed, but we're really part of something bigger. So if you can challenge your sense of perspective a bit, in addition to turning to others for support, having a new perspective that allows for some failure, it does seem to help people go on and not be too injured. I'm not worried you're going to go too far in that direction. I just worry that some of you expect too much of yourself sometimes. Finally, I think if you find yourself experiencing moral injury, then I would suggest you want to have a new plan. Whatever it is you've been doing to nurture that part of yourself, if you've been injured, the plan wasn't quite adequate enough. So let me mention some things that people have done that have helped them have kind of a better shot at managing moral injury. The first thing is they know themselves well enough to know what feeds their heart and their soul. And you do too. If you think about it, you know what does that for you. Is it a walk out in the woods, up in the mountains, down by the beach? Is it listening to music? Is it seeing a movie or reading a book? Is it spending time with family or a favorite pet? Is it meditating and praying and reflecting and doing mindfulness exercises or yoga? Is it participating in communities of faith and identifying with religious groups? I mean, you know yourself what feeds your soul and your spirit. And that's the very thing that helped bring you into this work to begin with. That made you the caregiver that you are and the healthcare professional you are. Tap into that again. If you've lost the pipeline to that reservoir, rebuild it and use it, because it will help you with moral injury. The next thing I would say is pursue what matters most to you. Some things just aren't worth the bother. So you're going to pick your battles. You're going to decide what's most important in terms of patient care. And you're going to pursue those. And then right along with that, that's going to lead some of you to say, my values and who I am as a person that's grounded in my heart and soul makes doing this that I'm being required to do unacceptable. If I keep doing that, I'm going to suffer moral injury. So I've either got to change my position, change my responsibilities, change my specialty, whatever it takes. The price is too high for you to have your heart and soul injured for too long. So don't give up your values and fight for them. And if you can't change the system, then play a different game, go to a different system. But don't sacrifice your values. It's just not worth it. You're doing this to provide the best health care possible. Okay, so now let's think for a minute. We've talked about moral injury and how it's different than burnout or compassion fatigue or traumatic stress. We've talked about how it's kind of one of those secret sort of ways to suffer because it's not talked about much. There's not an easy paradigm to use to study it. Then we've talked about the sources of it in which you see and do and know. Then we've talked about how you may be experiencing it as either anger or sadness or numbness. And then we've talked about some things that you can do to help yourself with it, like getting support, having a new perspective, and having a new plan. All of that is to regenerate hope. If you don't have hope, it's hard to do your work. And it's hard to regenerate hope when your soul's been injured. So, before I go, let me ask you a couple questions. First of all, how injured are you? As you've been thinking, as I've been mentioning all this, what have you thought about yourself? Are you morally injured? Or can you think of a time when you were? How severe was that injury? Was it mild or moderate or severe? Is it going on now? Are you morally injured at the moment? What do you know will help you the most with that injury as you think through the things other people have done to help themselves with this? What's most likely to benefit you and help your soul regenerate? And are you willing to take a couple of steps to do that? I'd encourage you. You've got a lot of stuff you're hearing today. But if you've decided today that the key to your well-being is resilience, I'd encourage you to take a good look at moral injury and see if it's undermining your resilience. Because in our work and in our research, that's what we found. That was one of the ways people's resilience was being undermined, was by moral injury. So take a good look and then make some decisions to do something about this. If you want to learn more about it, take a look at our website, Headington-institute.org. We've got a bunch of resources on there that are available for free. Download what looks good to you and make good use of it and pass it around. Moral injury is something that you can do something with. We do it all the time with the folks we work with. You can do something with this too. Take it seriously, do what you need to do so that your spirit is healthy and strong. Thanks so much for listening to me. Thank you for the work you're doing. And be safe. Thanks.